I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Rebecca Paul.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am grateful for being granted this debate on the safety and well-being of women in HMP Downview. Women prisoners are some of the most vulnerable in our society, yet very few people give much thought to the conditions they are being held in. Today, I want to draw attention to an unacceptable situation, one that not only places these women at risk of harm, but fails to recognise their basic rights. The law is being broken, and it's been broken by our public institutions. It was in 1823 that the Jail Act was passed, mandating sex-segregated prisons. Before that, women in prisons faced sexual assault and exploitation on a daily basis. It was Elizabeth Fry who brought about important reform that improved conditions for women. But she would be turning in her grave at where we now find ourselves over 200 years later. I will, of course, give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Lady for Reidgate for bringing this forward? Spoke to her beforehand in relation to it. I thank the lady for raising the issue. Reports have shown that there has been a 90% increase in the number of mentally unwell women at Downview who face extended delays in getting the support they need. Just like a situation back home at Hydebank Wood in Northern Ireland. In addition to this, prison staff are not trained mental health professionals, so the necessary healthcare support isn't there. So does the Honourable Lady agree with me that provision must be there to properly train prison staff to support them in supporting prisoners who are faced with long delays and deteriorating mental health?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He's absolutely right. It's a great source of concern to me, that situation in HMP Downview, and is something that I am raising with the Minister. I want to move on to another issue, though, which is that once again we have mixed-sex prisons. Inclusion trumping safety. Ideology winning out over reality. The feelings of a man holding more weight than the fears of many women. HMP Downview is a women's prison in Banstead near the Sutton border. It includes a wing, E-wing, specifically for biological males who identify as women. E-wing local policy sets out that it is for transgender women with or without a gender recognition certificate, where risk indicates they cannot be safely held in the general women's estate. Over the course of the last year, there have been between 5 and 7 males housed in this wing. The Minister in the other place has said that these males are vulnerable. Let's look at the facts. But before I do, a warning. Some may find the data difficult. It yields an uncomfortable truth, but one that it is incumbent upon this House not to ignore. In 2024, of the 245 transgender males in prison, i.e. biological males with a trans identity, 151 were convicted of a sexual offence. 62%. This is a far, far higher rate than that for the overall male prison population, which is only around 17%. And it's not a one-off either. Similar can be seen for 2023, a rate of 56%. So sexual offences are massively overrepresented in this specific cohort of biological males.
Will the Honourable Lady give way on that, please?
I will, of course, give way.
Thank you. Can she clarify again, just for viewers and for anyone watching this debate, that what she's saying is that those biological males, fully intact biological males, housed on the women's estate are overwhelmingly convicted of violent sexual offences?
I thank my honourable friend for making that point. This is the reality of the data. We must not ignore what the data tells us. I did warn it makes for an uncomfortable truth, but it is. I can verify all of this and provide you with the data. I wouldn't come to this House and give you data that wasn't correct. Accordingly, we can conclude that the male transgender prison population poses a much higher risk to women and girls. When people parrot the line that trans women are not a threat to women, in the case of the prison population, I'm afraid that statement doesn't hold up. Zoe Watts, a biological male that identifies as a woman, was jailed for 8 years and 6 months after trying to make a gun with a 3D printer that had the capacity to cause mass casualties. He was arrested by armed officers, and a stockpile of weapons and materials was found at his home. There is a disturbing video on social media of him smashing a watermelon with women's faces on it using a glass shard-encrusted baseball bat. He was put in HMP Downview. And then there's Joanna Rowland Stewart, a biological male that identifies as a woman, who stabbed his partner to death with a samurai sword. He was put in HMP Downview too. And then there's John Dixon, known as Sally now. He is a paedophile that was found guilty of 30 sexual assault charges, involving 7 children, some as young as 6. He may have been held in HMP Downview too. There's also the more well-known trans women prisoners that hit the headlines, such as Isla Bryson and Karen White, both incarcerated with women. Isla Bryson from Scotland was jailed for raping 2 women. Only after being charged did he come out as transgender. This dangerous rapist was remanded in a women's prison. Holyrood, it seems, is even worse than Westminster for drinking the gender Kool-Aid. The case of Karen White is even more appalling. A trans woman convicted of rape and a knife attack. He was remanded in HMP Newhall, a women's and young offenders prison, where he sexually assaulted 2 inmates. Thankfully, this dangerous predator is no longer in the women's prison estate. I hope honourable members today understand why I have grave concerns about such violent males continuing to be incarcerated with women. Not only is it against the law, the Supreme Court clarified back in April that single-sex provision must be based on biological sex alone, not anything else, but it is irresponsible and dangerous. Women prisoners deserve better than this. They should feel and be safe. I now want to get into a bit more detail on E-Wing itself within HMP Downview. Ministers have said many times in response to written questions that E-Wing is not part of the General Women's Estate. An odd statement for them to make. E-Wing is a wing within HMP Downview, and HMP Downview is a women's prison. Ergo, E-Wing is part of the women's prison estate. I have visited it and seen it with my own eyes. So why might ministers be at pains to say it's not part of the General Women's Estate? I believe they are using a play on words to obscure the fact that the single-sex provisions of the Equality Act are being breached. The current policy for managing transgender prisoners, introduced by the former Right Honourable Member for Esher and Walton when he was Justice Secretary, prohibits male prisoners who retain their birth genitalia or have any history of sexual or violent offences from being held in the General Women's Estate unless an exemption is granted by a minister. So this ministerial characterisation of E-Wing as not being part of the General Women's Estate appears to be a tenuous effort to argue that they have complied with the policy and the Equality Act after all. E-Wing is physically located within a women's prison. It is subject to the same policies and procedures as the rest of HMP Downview. It has the same governor. Its funding comes out of the same pots. Its inmates are supported by the same health service. It beggars belief that ministers think we will believe that this wing isn't part of the women's estate. So putting to one side for now this blatant breach of the Equality Act, let's consider whether the males held in E-Wing are truly segregated from the rest of the female population. Again, ministers keep saying they are. But E-Wing is like any other wing. I will not. It has sleeping quarters and bathrooms along with some living room space. Everything else that these prisoners need, like work, education and health services, are only available in the main estate. They therefore spend their days mixing with the women. So, what are the supervision arrangements in place to protect the women from these dangerous males? In September of this year, I will not. The Independent Monitoring Board published their report on HMP Downview and shed some light on this. The report makes it clear that there had previously been a requirement for constant sight and sound supervision of E-Wing prisoners by a dedicated prisoner officer on a one-to-one basis, whilst in activities alongside prisoners in the general population. However, the report notes that this was changed earlier in the reporting period. It says the previous one-on-one supervision arrangement was replaced by staff having general oversight of the E-Wing residents off the wing, as they do for all other prisoners. In other words, nothing additional. So to be completely clear, we have violent males housed in a women's prison, which in itself is against the law. These males are not segregated from the women in the daytime. They use all the same services and communal spaces. And these violent males aren't supervised any differently to the female prisoners. The previous one-on-one supervision by a dedicated prison officer being stopped. This is gross negligence. It shows a complete disregard for the safety and well-being of female prisoners at HMP Downview. And what has Minister's responses been to this supervision issue raised in the report? Are they horrified? Have they committed to look into this? No, of course not. But what they did do is remove the chair of the Independent Monitoring Board the day after publication of the report, highlighting the safeguarding failure. Before I bring my speech to a close, I want to comment on assertions that these males haven't caused any issues for female prisoners. In reality, I really don't know if that's the case, because my question on how many of the prisoner-on-prisoner assaults on HMP Downview were committed by males hasn't elicited a response. Ministers simply say that the information could only be obtained at disproportionate cost. Why isn't this information being provided? Failure to respond to this straightforward question does not fill me with confidence. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd be grateful if the Minister could answer the following. When are the biological males being moved out of HMP Downview and all other women's prisons too, in accordance with the Equality Act? What immediate action is being taken about the inadequate supervision of these males in HMP Downview and any other women's prison where it is relevant? How comfortable is the Minister with the removal of the chair of the Independent Monitoring Board the day after the publication of the IMB September 2025 report highlighting the changes to supervision of E-wing inmates? And how many assaults of female prisoners and prison officers by biological males in the women's prison estate have taken place since the inclusion of males in women's prisons? And what percentage of total assaults do they make up? I thank all members for their participation in this debate this evening, and for those who notified me in advance that they would like to make an intervention and they were granted said intervention. Courtesy needs to be paid to these things. And the Minister too for listening to what I know is probably a difficult speech to listen to. I hope the issue at hand is now clear. I urge the Minister to finally grasp the nettle on this shocking scandal and ensure women's prisons become single-sex once again. We managed to get this right over 200 years ago. Please restore our faith that this country is not going backwards on basic safeguards and rights for women. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Reigate for securing this debate this evening. This is an important issue that inspires much emotion from both sides of the debate, and it is vital that we handle this sensitively and with care. Women make up only a very small proportion of those in custody, yet they often have, as the Honourable Member said, some more complex needs than men. 68% of women in custody have reported experience of domestic abuse, and more than half have suffered abuse as a child. As the Minister for Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls, I am very aware of these issues. It is for these reasons that I was delighted that the Government has created the Women's Justice Board, which will help reduce the number of women in prison, and why I was proud that the Labour manifesto committed to continuing to support the single-sex exemptions available in the Equality Act.
Would the Minister give way?
I will happily give way.